The outer ring of Savan Prime's capital city had always been built to impress visitors. Towers curved upward like blades of glass, transport lanes hummed through the air in silent ribbons, and the palace itself stood at the center like a mountain carved from polished metal. To most civilizations, it looked like the heart of a perfect empire. To Davin Ray's, it looked like a place where one wrong sentence could start an interstellar incident. The shuttle's landing thrusters cooled with soft clicking sounds as the ramp slowly extended. Davin remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, staring through the small viewport at the enormous plaza outside. Thousands of soldiers stood in perfect formation. Hovering drones watched from the air like patient mechanical birds, and at the very top of the palace stairs stood Queen Mevrin. Davin exhaled slowly. "Well," he said quietly, "that looks friendly." Lyra Savan stood beside him with her arms folded, watching the same view with a calm expression that Davin had long ago learned to mistrust. When Lyra looked that calm, it usually meant something extremely complicated was about to happen. "You said you were ready for this," she replied. "I am ready," Davin said. "But when you said my mother might be a little formal, I didn't realize you meant an entire army." Lyra tilted her head slightly. "That's just the ceremonial guard." "Just?" "Yes." Davin leaned forward and squinted through the window again. "Those ships in the sky, ceremonial patrol. And the drones, ceremonial surveillance. And the extremely tall woman who looks like she could personally declare gravity illegal." Lyra smiled faintly. "That's my mother." Davin nodded slowly. "Good, I was worried." Behind them, two small voices were arguing in urgent whispers. "Can I press the button?" "No, Dad said don't press anything." "But it's glowing." "That's exactly why you shouldn't press it." Davin turned around in his seat. 8-year-old Mara Reyes Savan was leaning over the navigation console with intense curiosity. Her younger brother Talon stood beside her with the serious expression of someone who understood that glowing buttons often caused problems. "Mara," Davin said. She froze. "Yes, Dad." "What did we say about pressing mysterious alien controls? They might activate the ship's self-destruct." "Correct." She slowly removed her finger from the glowing panel. "Technically," she added thoughtfully, "this isn't mysterious alien technology, it's human technology." Davin rubbed his forehead. "That doesn't help." Lyra crouched beside the children and adjusted Talon's collar. "Your grandmother is waiting outside," she said gently. Mara's eyes widened. "The queen?" "Yes." "The real queen?" "Yes." "The one who rules the giant empire with the scary statues and the laser fleets." Lyra nodded once. "That queen." Talon looked up with thoughtful curiosity. "Do we bow?" Davin opened his mouth. Lyra raised a finger. "We do not panic," she said calmly. "We walk down the ramp, we greet her politely. And we try not to accidentally insult an empire." Mara raised her hand. "What counts as an insult?" Davin answered immediately. "Let's assume almost everything." The shuttle ramp finished lowering with a quiet mechanical hum. Outside, the massive plaza stretched toward the palace steps like a stage waiting for actors. Lyra stood first. For a moment she didn't move, simply looking at the place where she had grown up. The city was unchanged. The palace towers still reflected the sky the same way they had when she was a child running through its endless corridors. 10 years had passed. 10 years of exploration, arguments, discoveries, and laughter aboard small research ships that constantly smelled like Davin's coffee experiments. And now she was back. Davin stepped beside her. "You're thinking about running away again, aren't you?" Lyra glanced at him. "I am thinking about whether my mother will have you arrested." "That's comforting." "She probably won't." "Probably." "She's very curious." "That's not better." Behind them, Mara bounced lightly on her feet. "Can we go now?" Talon nodded. "I want to see the palace robots." "They might not have palace robots," Davin said. Mara looked shocked. "What kind of empire doesn't have robots?" Lyra straightened and stepped onto the ramp. "Let's go meet your grandmother." They descended slowly. The plaza was completely silent except for the distant hum of hovering patrol craft. Thousands of soldiers watched without moving. At the top of the palace steps, Queen Mevrin stood perfectly still. Davin leaned slightly toward Lyra. "Your mom is staring at me." "Yes." "Is that good?" "No." They reached the bottom of the ramp. The children stood between them. For several long seconds no one spoke. Mara leaned closer to Davin. "She looks important." "That's because she is." Talon tilted his head. "She also looks like she doesn't smile very much." Davin nodded quietly. Extremely accurate observation. At the top of the stairs, Mevrin began walking down toward them. Every step was slow, deliberate, controlled. Mara whispered to Lyra, "Is she always this dramatic?" Lyra tried not to laugh. "Yes, cool." When the queen reached the bottom of the steps, she stopped a few meters away. Her eyes moved from Lyra to Davin, then to the two children. Mara stared right back at her. After a moment, she leaned toward Talon and whispered not nearly quietly enough, "I think that's her." Talon nodded. "Yeah. She has the queen face." For several seconds after Talon's whisper, the enormous plaza remained perfectly silent. Davin felt every soldier, drone, and distant guard tower watching the moment as if the fate of the Empire depended on what happened next. Technically, it might. Queen Mevrin studied the two children in front of her with the intense focus of someone examining a rare scientific phenomenon. Her silver eyes moved slowly between Mara and Talon, analyzing every detail. Then she spoke. "Did you just say I have a queen face?" Talon nodded with complete honesty. "Yes." Davin closed his eyes for a moment. This is how it ends, he thought. Not with war, with a child's observation. But Mevrin did not look angry. She looked confused. "And what," she asked carefully, "is a queen face?" Talon considered this seriously. "It's when someone looks like they make important rules." Mara added helpfully, "and when people stand very straight around them." Several soldiers nearby shifted slightly, suddenly aware of their posture. The queen blinked once. Behind her, a tall advisor with a long ceremonial staff quietly pretended to study the sky. Mevrin turned her gaze toward Lyra. "These are your children." "Yes," Lyra replied calmly. "Half human." "Yes." The queen looked back at them. "They are loud." Mara raised her hand immediately. "I can be quieter if you want." "No," Mevrin said slowly. "I am simply observing." Davin cleared his throat. "Technically they're on their best behavior right now." Lyra nodded slightly. "Very much so." Mevrin studied Davin next. "You are the scientist." Davin straightened slightly. "I prefer researcher, but yes." "You took my daughter beyond the borders of the Empire." Lyra crossed her arms. "Mother," Mevrin raised one hand calmly, "I am not accusing him." Davin waited. "Yet," the queen finished. "Fair," Davin said. The two children were now whispering again. Mara leaned toward Talon. "Her dress is cool." Talon nodded. "It probably has hidden armor." "That would be awesome." Mevrin's gaze dropped toward them again. "You believe my robes contain armor?" Talon shrugged. "Smart rulers wear armor." Mevrin slowly looked down at her ceremonial robes. "They do not." Mara grinned. "Missed opportunity." Behind the queen, one of the hovering drones quietly recorded the entire exchange. Davin noticed it and leaned toward Lyra. "Are those recording?" "Yes." "So somewhere in the Imperial archives there will be a file labeled First Contact between royal bloodline and extremely curious grandchildren." "Most likely." Mara looked up at the massive palace behind the queen. "Is that where you live?" "Yes," Mevrin replied. "It's huge." "Yes." "Do you ever get lost?" Mevrin paused. "Occasionally." Talon looked impressed. "Good. That means it's a real palace." Davin quietly rubbed his face. Lyra glanced at him. "You're doing fine." "I'm meeting the most powerful woman in 3-star systems while our daughter critiques her architecture." "Relax." "I am extremely relaxed." Mevrin stepped slightly closer. The soldiers behind her shifted subtly but did not interfere. Up close, the children were studying her without fear. "Your names," Mevrin said. "Mara," the girl replied immediately. "Talon," the boy said. Mevrin repeated them slowly as if memorizing something important. Mara Talon. Talon looked up. Your turn. Davin whispered quickly, that's the queen. Yes, Talon said. But what's her name? The queen watched him carefully. Mevrin, Talon nodded once. Okay, Mara suddenly gasped. Oh, everyone looked at her. Does this mean we're technically royal now? Davin blinked. That is a complicated political question. Lyra pressed her lips together to avoid laughing. Mevrin looked at the girl. You are descendants of the Savan bloodline. Mara's eyes widened. Does that come with a spaceship? The queen paused. Davin leaned forward quickly. We are not asking for spaceships. Yet, Mara whispered. Lyra gently placed a hand on her shoulder. The tension in the plaza had changed. It was still enormous, still delicate. But something unexpected had slipped into it. Something warmer. Mevrin looked again at the two children standing calmly in the center of the Empire's most intimidating plaza. Then she spoke quietly. You traveled across half the galaxy to come here. Lyra nodded. Yes. Why? Lyra glanced briefly at Davin, then at the children, because families should meet each other. The queen said nothing. For a long moment she simply looked at them. Then Mara raised her hand again. One more question. Davin whispered urgently. Maybe not. Do you have palace robots? The question about palace robots remained floating in the air long enough for several Imperial officers to begin questioning their career choices. Queen Mevrin stared at Mara with the same careful attention she might have given a newly discovered alien species. No, the queen said slowly. We do not have palace robots. Mara's shoulders slumped. That's disappointing. Talon crossed his arms thoughtfully. You're an advanced interstellar empire. Yes, Mevrin replied. You should really consider palace robots. Davin covered his mouth with his hand. Lyra leaned slightly toward him. You're enjoying this. I absolutely am not. Yes, you are. A little. The queen turned her attention back to the human scientist standing beside her daughter. You allow your children to critique imperial infrastructure. Davin nodded. We encourage curiosity. Mevrin glanced at Mara again. She has a great deal of curiosity. That's the polite word for it. Mara suddenly noticed the hovering surveillance drone above the plaza. Her eyes widened immediately. Oh. She pointed upward. That one's a robot. Every soldier in the plaza instinctively looked up. The drone remained hovering in perfect silence, its small sensor lenses quietly observing the gathering. Mara waved enthusiastically. Hello, robot. The drone did not respond. Talon squinted at it. I think it's shy. Mevrin slowly looked at one of her advisors. Is the surveillance unit shy? The advisor hesitated. No, Your Majesty. Mara tilted her head. Can it talk? Davin gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Probably not. Why not? Because that would make my life even more stressful right now. The girl nodded in understanding. That's fair. Queen Mevrin turned back to Lyra. You brought them here knowing they would behave like this. Lyra smiled faintly. I brought them here knowing they would behave like themselves. For the first time, something close to amusement flickered briefly across the queen's face. It disappeared quickly, but Davin noticed. So, Davin said carefully, are we still standing outside because of tradition or because nobody knows what to do next? Several Imperial officers stiffened. Mevrin considered the question. You are correct that protocol did not anticipate this situation. Intergalactic family reunions are rare, Davin said. Mara tugged on Lyra's sleeve. Are we allowed to go inside the giant palace? Lyra looked at her mother. Mevrin followed the child's gaze toward the towering structure behind her. The palace of Savan Prime had hosted emperors, war councils, planetary governors, and ambassadors from hundreds of civilizations. Never grandchildren. She looked down again at Mara and Talon. Have you ever seen a gravity garden? Both children blinked. A what? Mara asked. A botanical chamber where the gravity shifts slowly while the plants grow. Mara's mouth dropped open. That's real, yes. Talon's eyes lit up. Do the trees float? Sometimes. The boy immediately looked at his sister. We're definitely staying. Davin sighed. That was a very effective recruitment strategy. Lyra glanced at him. You're welcome. Mevrin turned and began walking slowly back toward the palace steps. After a few steps she stopped and looked back. You are coming. It was not a question. Mara grabbed Talen's arm. We're going inside. The two children hurried forward before anyone could establish royal walking order. Davin winced. Should they be running toward the ruler of an empire like that? Lyra shrugged. Too late now. The soldiers lining the plaza parted automatically as the small group moved toward the palace. Thousands of perfectly disciplined warriors stepped aside for two excited children who were now whispering rapidly about floating trees. Davin walked beside Lyra, lowering his voice. Your mother hasn't ordered my arrest yet. She won't. You say that very confidently. She's thinking. That worries me more. Ahead of them, Mara was now walking beside the queen herself. So how big is the gravity garden? Large, Mevrin replied. Can things float upside down? Yes. Can people, with the proper equipment? Talen gasped. We need that equipment. Mevrin glanced at the boy. You intend to experiment with palace gravity systems. Probably. Behind them, one of the imperial advisors whispered nervously to another. This was not in the protocol manual. Nothing about today is in the protocol manual. Inside the palace entrance, enormous doors opened silently. The interior was even larger than the plaza outside. Towers of light climbed toward distant ceilings, and transport platforms floated gently through the air. Mara spun slowly in a circle. Okay, she said with complete seriousness. This place is awesome. Talen pointed toward a hovering transport platform drifting nearby. Can we ride that? Davin whispered to Lyra. How long before they accidentally take control of the palace? Lyra considered it. 3 days. That's optimistic. At the front of the group, Queen Mevrin paused in the middle of the vast hall and looked back at the strange procession following her. Her daughter, a human scientist, and two children who were currently debating whether the floating transport platforms counted as robots. The Empire had faced wars, rebellions, and invasions. None of them had prepared her for this. Mara tugged lightly on her sleeve. Grandmother, Mevrin looked down. Yes. Where are the floating trees? Queen Mevrin did not answer immediately. Not because she did not know where the gravity garden was. She had commissioned it herself decades earlier as a symbol of the Empire's mastery over planetary engineering. The garden could simulate dozens of gravitational environments at once, allowing alien plant life from across the galaxy to grow in the same chamber. What slowed her answer was the word the girl had just used. Grandmother. Mara stood beside her patiently, waiting as if she had asked the most ordinary question in the universe. Down the west corridor, Mevrin finally said. Mara nodded with approval. Good. Talen pointed toward the floating transport platform drifting nearby. Can we take that? Davin leaned closer to Lyra. I'm almost afraid to ask, but are children normally allowed to pilot Imperial transportation systems? No, Lyra said. That's reassuring. The platform glided toward them, responding automatically to Mevrin's presence. It lowered slightly, inviting passengers aboard. Mara stepped onto it without hesitation. Oh, this is cool. Talen followed. Dad, it's like a flying floor. Davin stepped on more cautiously. It is absolutely a flying floor. Lyra joined them with practiced balance. The platform rose gently into the air and began drifting down the vast corridor. Behind them, 3 Imperial advisors stared in silent disbelief. Did the Queen just allow unknown children access to palace transport systems? One whispered. Yes, the other replied. We should document this. Carefully. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead of them, lined with tall crystalline pillars that glowed softly with internal energy. Between them floated small information drones that quietly monitored the palace environment. Mara pointed at one. Robot. Talen nodded. That one's definitely a robot. The drone rotated slightly and moved out of their reach. Shy robot, Mara concluded. Davin looked at Mevrin. I hope your palace insurance is good. What is insurance? The Queen asked. Davin blinked. You run an interstellar empire and don't have insurance. We have fleets. Fair point. The platform glided smoothly through a towering doorway and into a chamber that seemed almost impossibly large. At first glance it looked like a forest. Then Mara noticed the trees. They were floating. Massive silver-blue trunks drifted slowly in midair, their branches spreading outward in delicate spirals. Some trees hung upside down, their roots extending toward glowing energy fields embedded in the walls. Small streams of water floated through the air like ribbons, looping gently between the plants. Soft gravity fluctuations made leaves drift slowly before settling again. Mara gasped. Talen's jaw dropped. Whoa! Davin stepped off the platform and stared upward. Okay, he admitted quietly, that's impressive. Lyra smiled faintly. I told you. Mara ran forward until she reached the edge of a floating garden island. The trees are flying. Yes, Mevrin said calmly. Talon pointed at a cluster of plants spinning slowly in the air. Are those alien plants? Yes. From different planets? Yes. Mara turned back toward the Queen. You're officially the coolest grandmother ever. The words echoed through the chamber. Several nearby palace attendants froze. Davin whispered urgently. You just promoted her to coolest grandmother. Mara shrugged. She earned it. Mevrin looked around the chamber as if seeing it differently. The gravity garden had always been a symbol of power. Diplomats had walked through it while discussing trade routes and territorial boundaries. No one had ever called it cool. Talon stepped carefully onto a small, hovering path. Can we climb the floating trees? Davin immediately answered. No. Lyra answered at the same time. Probably. Mevrin watched the boy examining the drifting branches. They are structurally stable, she said. Davin looked at her. Your Majesty, with respect, that sentence terrifies me. Mara had now discovered a patch where the gravity shifted every few seconds. She stepped into it and slowly lifted off the ground. I'm floating. Talon jumped in beside her. We're floating. The two children drifted gently a few feet into the air, laughing as the gravity field rotated them slowly. Davin watched them carefully. Okay, that actually looks safe. Lyra crossed her arms. You see, they're still not piloting anything. Yet, Mevrin stood quietly for a moment watching the scene. Her daughter leaned casually against a floating tree. The human scientist looked both amazed and mildly concerned. And her grandchildren were now spinning slowly in midair while arguing about who was floating more efficiently. Talon pointed upward. I'm higher. That's because you jumped, Mara said. That counts. No, it doesn't. Davin looked at the Queen. So, he said carefully, how often does the ruler of the Savan Empire host gravity-floating competitions? Never, Mevrin replied. Mara drifted gently toward her and grabbed one of the Queen's sleeves to steady herself. Grandmother, yes. Do you have bigger rooms than this? Mevrin looked down at the small hand gripping the sleeve of her royal robe. For thousands of years, the Savan royal garments had been designed to project authority. The fabric was woven from adaptive crystal fibers that could withstand energy fire, environmental hazards, and ceremonial insults from foreign diplomats. They had not been designed to function as emergency floating handles for curious grandchildren. Mara drifted gently beside her, rotating slowly in the shifting gravity field. So, the girl asked again, do you have bigger rooms than this? The Queen considered the enormous chamber. This room is 4 kilometers wide. Mara nodded thoughtfully. Okay, but do you have bigger ones? Davin laughed quietly. I like how that didn't answer her question. Lyra leaned against the floating trunk of a tree that was currently rotating slowly like a lazy satellite. She gets that from you. I do not question imperial architecture. You once asked if a research station could be turned into a pancake restaurant. That was a serious engineering proposal. Across the garden, Talon had discovered that the gravity shifted more dramatically near a glowing energy pillar. Each time he stepped closer, his feet lifted slightly off the ground. He jumped. The result was immediate. The boy floated nearly 2 meters upward before slowly drifting back down. His eyes widened. "Dad, yes. I accidentally discovered a low-gravity jump zone." Davin rubbed his forehead. "Of course you did." Talon tried it again. This time Mara joined him. Within seconds, the two children were carefully experimenting with controlled floating jumps, pushing off the ground and drifting across small sections of the garden like astronauts who had forgotten their mission. Mara landed beside one of the floating water streams and poked it. The water moved like a slow ribbon through the air. "Okay, this place is definitely magic." "It's gravitational field engineering," Mevrin corrected. "Same thing." The Queen watched them for a moment. The children were fearless. Not reckless exactly. Davin was keeping a careful eye on them, but curious in a way that felt strangely unfamiliar inside the rigid structure of the palace. Savan heirs were trained to move with discipline. These two moved with wonder. Talon pointed suddenly. "Hey!" Everyone looked. One of the floating trees nearby was slowly rotating upside down, its roots extending toward a glowing gravity node embedded in the ceiling. The boy stared at it. "That tree is upside down." "Yes," Mevrin said. "Is it comfortable like that?" The Queen paused. The tree does not appear to have expressed discomfort. Mara floated over and examined it closely. "Do alien trees get dizzy?" Davin crossed his arms. "That is now officially the most complicated biological question asked in this palace." Lyra watched her children with quiet amusement. "You're handling this well," she said softly to her mother. "I am adapting." Davin nodded. "That's the correct strategy." The Queen glanced at him. "You seem remarkably calm for someone standing inside the most secure structure of an interstellar empire." Davin looked around at the floating forests, drifting rivers, and laughing children. "Your Majesty, 10 years ago I married the daughter of the most powerful ruler in 3-star systems." "Yes. I've been living dangerously ever since." Mara drifted back toward them, spinning slightly before grabbing the edge of a floating platform. "Grandmother, yes, can we bring our dog here next time?" Davin froze. Lyra slowly covered her face. Mevrin blinked. "You have a dog?" "Yes." "What is a dog?" Talon immediately answered. "A very good animal." "It's fluffy," Mara added. "It steals socks," Talon said. "It's very loyal, and it drools sometimes." Davin raised a finger. "We are not bringing the dog into the Imperial Palace." Mara tilted her head. "But it would love the floating trees." The Queen looked around the massive chamber again. For centuries, this place had hosted ambassadors, scientists, and military strategists. None of them had suggested introducing drooling animals. "That seems unlikely," she said carefully. Talon suddenly pointed upward. "Hey!" A small maintenance drone had quietly entered the garden and was now scanning the gravity nodes. Mara grinned. "Robot." The drone paused midair as if reconsidering its career path. She waved enthusiastically. "Hello, robot." The machine beeped once and drifted away quickly. "Definitely shy," Talon concluded. Davin leaned toward Lyra. "Your empire's technology is being psychologically evaluated by children. They're thorough." The Queen looked at Mara again. "You asked if there are larger rooms than this." "Yes, there are." Mara's eyes lit up immediately. "How big?" Mevrin considered. "The orbital fleet command chamber is nearly twice this size." Talon gasped. "Does it have floating stuff?" "No, missed opportunity," Mara said. Davin laughed out loud. For a moment, the enormous gravity garden filled with a sound that had rarely existed in the palace before. Laughter. Mevrin looked at the children floating gently among the alien trees. Then she looked at her daughter. "You brought chaos into my empire." Lyra smiled. "I brought family." Talon drifted closer again and looked up at the Queen. "Grandmother, yes." "Can I jump higher than Mara?" Mara crossed her arms midair. "No, you can't." Mevrin studied the glowing gravity node above them. Then she quietly adjusted a control band on her wrist. The gravity field shifted slightly. Talon jumped. and launched nearly 3 meters into the air. His shocked laugh echoed through the floating forest. Talon rose into the air with the slow, astonished grace of someone who had just discovered that gravity was apparently negotiable. His arms flailed for a second. Then he laughed. Whoa! Mara looked up from the ground, eyes wide with outrage. That's cheating. Talon floated above the garden paths, turning slowly as the altered gravity field caught him like a gentle current. I regret nothing. Davin immediately stepped forward, watching carefully. Okay, that is definitely higher than expected. Lyra tilted her head slightly. Mother. Queen Mevrin lowered her hand from the small control band on her wrist. It is a controlled adjustment. Yes, Lyra said slowly, but you just helped him win. The queen observed Talon drifting toward a floating branch. He appeared determined. Mara placed both hands on her hips. Grandmother. Yes. You helped him, yes. That is not fair. Mevrin considered this. He asked a question. That's not the same thing. Talon gently bounced off a gravity stream and slowly descended toward the ground again like a very satisfied comet. When his feet touched the floor, he raised both arms. Victory. Mara immediately stepped into the same gravity field and crouched. If you can do it, I can do it. Davin whispered to Lyra. Should we intervene? Too late. Mara jumped. The gravity field lifted her smoothly into the air, though slightly lower than Talon's jump. She spun slowly and grabbed one of the floating branches. I am still awesome. You're lower, Talon said helpfully. I am strategically lower. Davin rubbed his eyes. I feel like we just started the galaxy's first royal gravity sport. Lyra smiled. You should see them in zero-gravity maintenance corridors. I do not want to see that. Nearby, the small maintenance drone had returned and was now cautiously scanning the gravity node Mevrin had adjusted. Mara noticed it again. Robot is back. Talon waved. Hello, robot. The drone beeped quietly, rotating its sensors toward the children. Davin leaned toward the queen. I think it's studying them. It is recalibrating the gravity field. Or writing a report. What kind of report? Warning. Small humans may attempt to reprogram gravity for entertainment. Mevrin looked at the drone thoughtfully. That would not be inaccurate. Mara floated down and landed lightly beside the queen. She stared at the glowing control band on Mevrin's wrist. That made the gravity stronger. Yes. Can I try? No, just once. No, just a little. No, Mara nodded. Okay. Davin relaxed for half a second. Then she pointed. But what about that one? Across the chamber, a second control pillar glowed softly beside a floating island of plants. Lyra laughed quietly. You should never have shown her how gravity works. I did not show her, Mevrin said. You demonstrated. Talon wandered over to the floating water ribbon again. He poked it and watched the stream wobble. Dad, yes. If this river is floating, where does it go? Davin walked over and studied the slowly moving water. It loops through a magnetic channel. Talon blinked. So it's a circle river. Yes. That's weird. It's science. Talon shrugged, still weird. Mara was now walking beside the queen again. Grandmother, yes. How many planets do you control? Mevrin answered calmly. 412 inhabited systems. Mara nodded thoughtfully. That's a lot. Yes. Do you visit them? Sometimes. Do they all have floating forests? No, missed opportunity again. Davin burst out laughing. Lyra crossed her arms. You're encouraging her. I can't help it. At the far side of the garden, the maintenance drone suddenly emitted a louder beep. Everyone looked. The gravity node that Mevrin had adjusted earlier flickered. The drone quickly stabilized it. Talon tilted his head. Did we break gravity? Davin sighed. That sentence should never exist. Mevrin walked toward the node and studied the drone's repair work. The system is stable. Mara followed her. So gravity is okay? Yes. Good. She paused. Then she looked up at the floating trees again. Grandmother, yes. Can we sleep here tonight? Davin nearly choked. We are not sleeping in the floating forest. Mara pointed upward. But imagine waking up floating. Lyra looked thoughtful. That does sound interesting. Davin stared at her. You are not helping. Mevrin looked around the massive chamber, the drifting water, the rotating alien trees. The two children who had turned the Empire's most prestigious botanical installation into a playground. Then she said quietly, there are guest chambers nearby. Mara gasped. Floating guest chambers. No, can they become floating? No, Talon looked disappointed. Davin exhaled with relief. Finally. Then Mevrin added, but the ceiling opens to the stars. Mara and Talon both froze. The ceiling opens. Yes. Davin looked at Lyra slowly. We are definitely not sleeping tonight. The ceiling of the guest chamber opened with a quiet mechanical sigh. Segments of transparent alloy slid slowly apart, revealing the deep black of space above Savon Prime. The stars appeared sharp and endless, scattered across the sky like distant embers. Mara lay flat on her back in the middle of the enormous bed, staring upward. Okay, she whispered. This is officially the best ceiling ever. Talon lay beside her, hands folded behind his head. It's not really a ceiling. It used to be. Now it's a space window. Davin stood near the edge of the chamber with Lyra, watching the children slowly grow quiet as the long day finally caught up with them. I'm surprised they're still awake, he said. Lyra smiled softly. They've traveled across half the galaxy and met the ruler of an interstellar empire, who helped them cheat in a gravity competition. Davin nodded thoughtfully. That's still my favorite moment. Across the room, Queen Mevrin stood near the open observation balcony. The night air from the upper atmosphere drifted through the chamber in soft currents. For a long time she said nothing. She simply watched the stars. 10 years ago she had stood in the same palace convinced she understood everything about destiny, bloodlines, duty, empire. The universe had seemed simple then. Behind her, Mara suddenly spoke again. Grandmother, yes, did you ever go exploring in space when you were young? Mevrin turned slowly. No, why not? I was preparing to rule. Talon tilted his head. That sounds less fun. Davin whispered to Lyra. That child is brutally honest. Lyra nodded. He gets that from me. Mara sat up slightly. Mom says space is really big. It is, Mevrin said. Dad says you can learn new things everywhere. That is also true. Talon pointed upward. Have you been to that star? Mevrin looked at the bright blue point above the horizon. No, why not? The queen hesitated. For centuries the Savon Empire had expanded outward with careful precision. Exploration had always been strategic, calculated but never curious. Davin stepped closer to the balcony. You know, he said gently, a lot of the best discoveries happen by accident. Lyra looked at her mother. I think Mara and Talon proved that today. Mara grinned. We discovered the gravity jump game. And shy robots, Talon added. The maintenance drone from the garden suddenly floated quietly through the doorway behind them, performing its nightly environmental scan. Mara waved immediately. Hello again, robot. The drone beeped politely. Talon sat up. It likes us now. Davin leaned against the railing. I'm starting to think your empire is going to change. Mevrin looked at him. How? Davin gestured toward the room. You spent 10 years waiting for your daughter to return alone. That was my expectation. She didn't. No, you got something else instead. The queen looked at the two children now slowly drifting toward sleep beneath the open stars. Yes, she said quietly. Lyra stepped closer to her. Are you angry? Mevrin was silent for a moment, then she shook her head. No. She walked toward the bed where Mara and Talon were lying. Mara's eyes were already half closed. Grandmother, yes. Do empires always feel this big? Sometimes. The girl yawned. Good. Why? Because families should have room to grow. A few seconds later she was asleep. Talon lasted another minute. Then his eyes closed too. Davin looked down at them and lowered his voice. Well, he said softly, they survived meeting the alien queen. Lyra nudged him. She's not just the queen. He nodded. Right. He glanced at Mevrin. They'll probably remember this day forever. The queen stood beside the bed, looking at the two quiet figures beneath the open sky. Her empire stretched across hundreds of star systems. But for the first time in many years, the future did not feel like something that needed to be controlled. It felt open. She looked back toward the stars above the palace. Then she spoke quietly. To rule the stars is impressive. Davin and Lyra looked at her. But to explore them, Mevrin continued, may be far more interesting. Davin smiled. That's a good philosophy. Lyra reached for her mother's hand. Outside, the palace lights dimmed as Savon Prime rotated slowly beneath the night sky. And for the first time in the long history of the Empire, its future was being